That's part of the social contract that race directors and participants make every single time that someone registers for a race. That is the business that we're in, is health and safety.
Welcome to the Shakeout Podcast. I'm your host, Kate Van Buskirk. Last weekend, the Calgary Marathon hosted 4,000 participants, making it the largest in-person race event in Canada since the start of the pandemic. Kirsten Fleming, the executive director of Run Calgary, was a guest on our show at the start of COVID to talk about the massive pivot to virtual races. This week, she's back to tell us about how her team pulled off this incredible feat and to offer advice for other race directors about how to keep in-person events going strong this fall and beyond. Good morning, Kirsten. It is so great to see you again. Thanks for joining us for the second time on the Shakeout Podcast. How are you feeling?
Pretty darn good, Kate. Thanks for having me.
Well, you know, it's so funny. I was just listening to the episode that we had you on last, and the last time you were on the show was 3 mere weeks into the COVID-19 pandemic. And it's really interesting going back and listening to that episode because I think at that time, you know, neither of us could have anticipated that almost 20 months later, we'd be having you back on to talk about continuing to make huge adjustments for this pandemic. I mean, I think in the last episode, you were explaining to our listeners what a virtual race is. And I thought,
we all get that now. We all know what that is now.
Right.
Whether you do it or not, you've heard a lot about it.
Absolutely. Yeah. So the contrast of that was quite funny in a way. And I know that a lot has changed, but I guess the silver lining is, although we're still talking about the pandemic and about virtual events, we are also here to talk with you about hosting Canada's largest race event since you were last on the show in those last 20 months. So congratulations, first of all, on a very successful Calgary Marathon weekend.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it took an army to get us to the start line and then through the day, but we did it and we're very grateful. And by largest, I looked at finishers versus starters versus registered versus how many people switched, and it was still teeny tiny. We're talking less than 4,000 finishers.
Wow.
It's wild.
And give us a sense of what the numbers are usually like for race weekend participation in person in the past.
Yeah, around 12,000, but we were on track leading up to the 2020 race before we postponed and then eventually canceled and went virtual to probably about 14,000. So yeah, the numbers were looking really strong right across the country from what I understand leading up to the pandemic. So we're hoping to pick that up on the other side at some point.
Yes, absolutely. And I know that this was a hybrid race as well. Maybe you can give us a sense of how many you have. I guess the races are still going on, right? Your virtual events are open for another couple of weeks, but do you have a sense of the registration numbers from that?
Yeah, because I packed packages yesterday for 5 hours, so I do have a sense. Yeah, absolutely. We have just shy of 1,200 virtual participants, and that's like not just in Canada, all around the world. We were sending packages yesterday to. We have a really strong group of people who follow everything Run Calgary does in Australia. So shout out to our Australian friends. But yeah, really sending packages right around the world.
Very exciting. That's awesome. We're going to talk more about the hybrid aspect of this whole thing in a little bit, but maybe you could start, you know, again, when I go back and listen to that episode that we spoke with you on about a year and a half ago, you give us a really great behind the scenes idea of what goes into putting on a race. And I think it was really useful for our audience and our run community to understand the pieces that they don't see, right? That go into to creating their favorite race day. I know this is a big question, but maybe in broad strokes terms, you can give us a sense of what the behind the scenes logistics looked like this year as opposed to pre-pandemic Calgary Marathon events.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, nothing was typical this year. Absolutely nothing leading up to the race. So I'll give you the broad stroke of what we did this year, but just keep in mind that it was not what we were doing in a typical year. And I guess really I'll start with the energy on a typical lead up to the race week, and the stoke is pretty high, both, you know, in the community, people are flying in from all over. Our volunteers are getting excited. Our staff is excited. There's just energy, even like digital energy on social media. Instead, we were in the days following up into a state of emergency. So we were really heavily focused on communications, customer service, volunteer relations, and generally just making sure that people, sponsors, volunteers, VIPs, and of course participants were feeling prepared and communicating like everything that we were doing. We were spending time interpreting the announcements that were coming out from the government since our health order took another 48 hours to come through. So the week leading up to this event this year was very strange. It's also a different time of year for us. The kids were just back in school. So, trying to break through the noise and get people's attention when, they're obviously distracted with elections and, the season starting for all their hockey and soccer, et cetera. So it was just like a really like strange time leading up. And very stressful, if I'm honest. Like we had another race on the Thursday before. So that would have been our first event in a year in person. It's much smaller. It's a collaboration we do with the Calgary Philharmonic Orchestra. So we're talking about 450 in-person people this year, with another couple hundred virtual. It's usually about 1,000. And then we typically have a 66-piece orchestra, but we had gone down to 10 musicians because we knew that we could socially distance in the tent, et cetera. So we had kind of a warm-up event to the Calgary Marathon. But what happened was that morning, our race director woke up with a cough. And, in a typical year, I'd, say, suck it up, Buttercup. It's event day. Let's get this going. But of course, this year we just said, okay, well, you got to go home, get your test, sleep. Hopefully you're better in 24 hours with a negative test and we can, start focusing on Calgary Marathon. And so that event, we did get to test our resiliency amongst our staff and volunteers. And, I can't really like gush enough about the inner circle of the Run Calgary volunteer family. Honestly, there's this like core group of humans who just are like superheroes. They're just like, yep, take the afternoon off, and they come out and they sling fences and they polish glasses for after the event and they set up the start arch. And so we managed to redeploy our staff into areas where we, cross train and understand each other's jobs. But as you can imagine, we came in very depleted from the last 18 months. I think you'll hear that from any race director, like coming into your event. It's like, we're just already so depleted with so much uncertainty. It's really not common to come into an event of any kind, mass participation, a conference, anything, to have this uncertainty hanging over your head of whether or not it's going to happen. So a lot of what went into the week leading up was normal in the sense of like, yeah, we were setting up and we were getting things ready and putting together event kits and training volunteers and doing course martial briefings. But there was just this air of uncertainty hanging over everyone's head. And we couldn't answer the questions any better than anyone else, but you just kind of have to keep forging ahead. And we did believe that our plan was sound and that the COVID protocols that we had in place, we knew exceeded what was already being required. The state of emergency was certainly a curveball we were not expecting. Despite the state of things in Alberta, our government certainly did flip-flop on their policies, but we were really confident that what we were doing was already exceeding what was required. And really those new regulations, once we started digging into them, they were just catching up to what we already had in place.
It's great to get ahead of that. And I want to talk about some of those protocols in a minute, but I'm curious about what you had said. It's so rare for in pre-pandemic times for people to not even know if their event is going to take place because of all the planning that goes into it, months and often years ahead of time. How did it come together for Run Calgary? How did this weekend come together? When did you think there's a glimmer of hope that we're going to be able to hold an in-person event? And what from that point forward did the planning look like? Again, I know there's lots of details, but maybe in broad strokes, like at what point were you certain that this was actually going to happen?
I was certain at lots of points in time over the last 6 months, and then I would be uncertain because something would happen. So I think going back, we decided in February of this year, we were moving to the marathon to the fall to give ourselves the best possible chance and runway at having as normal of an event as possible. We knew May would be just kind of coming out of whatever the winter waves were. And if there was going to be a chance at having a race, we knew that the fall was probably the best opportunity. And so we had been planning towards that fall date basically since the beginning of the year. And the planning was a lot different because basically we have scaled the event in every aspect of it. So that means every single process has been designed with the intent of doing a race a certain way. And when you start to add components like socially distance and pulse starts and fewer people, you really do tweak every aspect of the race, from the communications to the volunteers, to what they're going to be doing it on course, to how many barricades you need. Like it really affects, it's a waterfall effect. So we were essentially planning what I would call a net new event. The times of day change because obviously the sun's coming up later here in Alberta, which means our road closures go later. So it really did mean looking at the event with fresh eyes, which we had the opportunity to do because we hadn't done one in 2020 in person. And so from an operations logistics sense, I think our team dug really deep this year to create a Calgary Marathon that would be as true to an experience that people have come to love and know, but also give us the best possible chance of going forward in any type of pandemic condition because we just didn't know what things would look like. And so that obviously the biggest challenge is the communications, right? Because changing processes and then you're giving people options like to go virtual. We had people flip-flopping back and forth depending on how they felt and how the environment was. So every time that you make a change, you got to track that person. It's been really challenging from an admin perspective. I always joke with my team that no one can leave for at least 4 years until the headache of the pandemic has been cleaned up because we have spreadsheets everywhere. So yeah, I mean, the time leading up, I'll tell you, like we didn't do a high performance program. We stripped away a lot of the entertainment. We didn't do an awards show. So a lot of the bells and whistles were gone, but it was just still so much work. And I kind of was joking like to people who were asking, what can I expect when I show up on race day? I was saying like, it's the race your granddad used to do before we like created these massive spectacles with, bling and flair. And it's just such a sensory experience. Like, no, you're just going to show up. You're going to go for a run. You're going to have a great time. You're going to hopefully PB. You're going to come back. We're going to give you a little baggie with a banana and you're going to get on your way. And that's essentially what happened.
I think there's been a real return to the purity and the love of running and racing because of everything you're describing. I think that was such a draw for runners for a long time. And it's something I'm sure we'll all look forward to, hopefully in the future. But I've heard so many people say, I don't care if I don't have a bag drop. I don't care if I don't have a medal ceremony. I just want to get out there and run a course that is measured properly with a timing chip with some other people. And it sounds like you delivered that and a lot more. You wrote this beautiful post-race Instagram post. And one of the things you wrote was overwhelmingly what we've heard is how safe participants felt and how much people appreciated all of the protocols in place to mitigate risk of transmission. That's obviously one of the biggest goals and challenges I would imagine putting on an event right now. And so maybe you can speak more to the specific protocols that were in place to help with the prevention of the spread of this disease.
So I'll just say that for the last 18 months, race directors all across Canada and frankly the globe have been collaborating and creating the best practices. So by no means do I take credit for any of the following things. This is something that runners are going to find to be standard at most races. And we're also borrowing from other industries and learning from each other. Like I get post-race reports from people being like, hey, this is what I learned when we did pulse starts. Hey, if you want to, this is something to think about when you're doing your signage. So obviously we had the benefit of other events going before us over the last summer for sure. But even in Canada with Manitoba Marathon and Queen City Marathon being just the weekends previous, and Sean and Rachel, the two leaders of those organizations, giving us feedback. So, a lot of these things we were tweaking right up until the last moment. But I will say that, some things worked so well that we're talking about, will they be here to stay? So I'll give you some examples. We did not do an expo. We just did a package pickup, which meant there weren't a bunch of vendors and we weren't, I guess, encouraging anything that would have dwell time. So we made people sign up in advance. It made it so much easier for our volunteers because typically what happens when you open the expo in the morning is that there's a massive line and we're all still, working out the little nuances of things in the system and training volunteers. And it's the highest peak time. So it allows you to control the flow. We basically were like, we have 16 hours. We have 5,000 participants. Let's make sure that the first hour and the last hour of each day has fewer people. And then we kind of evened it out. And it meant that there was this like nice, even flow that came through package pickup and no one was ever stressed and no one had to wait. So it was a great experience for everyone. Of course, we did have mask on zones. It's mandatory to wear a mask inside in Alberta. And we were already asking people to do that before the regulations came down. But we also had mask on zones outside. And surprisingly, or maybe not surprisingly, I guess it depends on where you're from, but people were great. Like we really did not have to ask people to put their masks on in the areas where they were less able to socially distance. I mean, we were at Stampede Park, which is a massive footprint. and we had about a third of the people, but still all the space that we've normally had. So it was really easy to spread out. But of course, things like in chutes and the corrals, as they're getting into the start chute, we did have mask on zones, and we had everything kind of coned and marked so that they could easily understand how to socially distance. We limited our numbers, as I said, so from 12,000 down to about 4,000. We did contactless aid stations. So our volunteers were out there and prepared the tables, but people were grabbing their own water. We did pre-packed and single serve food items for post-race. And we invited people to air high five and, try and limit as much as they possibly could any contact. So we weren't putting medals around necks, etc. We added the live broadcast, we've always had a live broadcast, but I guess we really pushed the finish line stream and encouraged people to ask their friends and family if they were going to come out on race day to go out on course, which they did. So I heard the energy on course was just like the best that it's absolutely ever been. So hopefully that's something that continues. And then we saw that there was probably about 3,000 people watching the live broadcast of the stream on race morning. So that seeing their friends and family come in. And not having to come down to the grandstand and be around a lot of people. We do have 17,000 seats at the grandstand, so there's more than enough room for our charities and teams and friends and families to spread out. But we did see a lot of people stay home and watch it remotely, so that was great. And then I guess following the announcement that Alberta was going into the state of emergency, outdoor events were exempt, and so we were still given our permit. But we did add a couple of components after that just to really give people that extra layer of choice, I guess. So for package pickup, we added an outdoor only check-in where people could come down to the grandstand to get their package in person, but they didn't have to come inside. So we had volunteer runners and gophers who were going inside and grabbing their packages. And then that was the same for volunteers. They were allowed to check in and be redeployed outside if they didn't want to have one of the very few limited jobs inside a volunteer check-in. And then the last thing was that we worked with our partner Race Roster so that people could remotely transfer, upgrade, downgrade, or switch to virtual. So on the race weekend, what you typically find is that people come down to package pickup or the expo and they decide training's gone good. I feel great. I'm going to do half marathon. They get in a line and it's a pinch point. So people are standing around waiting to transfer to another distance. Or in our case, we found that a lot of people weren't comfortable racing in person on Sunday and had decided to go virtual. And again, would have had to come down to package pickup to do that. So Race Roster, amazing hustle, like 2 days before, put together a 1-800 number and had people staff it remotely. And we had people call in and they had to wait kind of, 3-4 minutes, transferred on the phone, and then came down and did the exact same process to go get their bib. But it was much quicker and it eliminated that dwell time on site.
That is a very extensive list. That's impressive and amazing that you were able to implement so many of these things. And again, I know you've had the time over the last year and a half to really kind of think deeply about what would be important and what would be not only like genuinely safe, but also what would probably instill a real feeling of safety in your community as well, and kind of establish that trust. Despite all of these best efforts, I can't help but imagine there was some nervousness on behalf of your organization about, first of all, whether you'd be able to pull it off. And then, well, maybe I'll put the question to you. Was there any conversation or concern that this might turn into a super spreading event?
Absolutely. We did have the conversations. We have been for months. And part of being in an organization like this, I report to a board of directors, a group of amazing, capable humans who, just like all of us, are in different places in their, pandemic journey and how they feel about things. And, it's like a lot of opinions and conversations. And our North Star has been that we are here to put on experiences for healthy people who are self-selecting to be at an event, and we're giving them choices if they change their mind. And that we would never do anything to put people at risk. One of our values is health and safety. It always has been. So that is one of our guiding missions. Working very closely with Alberta Health and then taking, like I said, some of the best practices from the industry and following the evidence and what's factual and the science. We know that outdoor events are being tracked through Mass Participation World and that there's over 4 million participants that have participated in a mass endurance event since the beginning of the pandemic, and that there's only 4 cases of COVID that have actually been linked to endurance events. And there's doctors and researchers that are following that study. So we felt confident that, what we were putting on was safer than going to the grocery store. And that even though we were bringing together a large group of people, that we were doing it outside, and that all of those mitigation protocols would be in place. So, from a reputation standpoint, we definitely talked about what does it look like to be putting on an event 3 days after a state of emergency has been called. And when we talked to the city, both, the evening that happened, the next morning, most of the day Friday, back and forth with public health officials, they had no issue with the protocols that we had put in place. And they were saying, nope, you can go ahead. And frankly, had every confidence because of our track record that we could do it safely. I mean, that's part of the social contract that race directors and participants make every single time that someone registers for a race. They are saying, I trust you to put on a safe race, that you're going to put on we're going to close the roads, and we're going to have medical people on site. And we might not talk about it, and now we do, but that is the business that we're in, is health and safety.
Yeah. And that contract certainly exists, as you said, between participants and, I'm sure all your stakeholders and the city and all the different entities that you talked about. I'm curious about the response from the general public who may not have participated in the race or aren't runners themselves, and maybe didn't understand all of the things that you were doing to make sure this was a safe and healthy event. Did you receive any negativity from the public or any sort of backlash about putting on an event this size?
I only hear about things when they get really escalated. So the report that I got from our team was that there were half a dozen negative comments on social media, on Twitter, and I guess on an article that was posted through the Canadian Running website a couple of days leading up. And I asked, do I need to go and look at them and deal with them? Or we kind of track to see if they get, we had people in our community and runners, and in fact, other race directors across the country kind of jump in and talk about the mass participation world study. And it kind of took care of itself before I ended up going to look after the event. I think, people didn't understand what we were doing, and we did have quite a few participants that, weren't sure. And we just said, the choice is yours. We had around 300 people switch from in-person to virtual from the day the state of the emergency was called to the in-person race. And that was their choice. And we made it very simple and easy, no questions asked. And in fact, we extended the window from September 30th to October 17th at the request of a number of participants who said, can we, have a little bit more time? So no problem. So I think the ethics and moral choice is going to really be subjective. And we as an organization felt that we were doing the right thing and doing people a great service, and that we would be disappointing a lot of people who have been training very hard. And I felt confident in the ability of our team and our volunteers to put on the safe race that we had planned, despite the circumstances. And as long as we were given a permit and permission, we felt we were going to forge forward.
Speaking of forging forward, another line that I really loved from that post that you created was, "We hope that this is the start of a path forward for mass participation events in Canada." And Kirsten, I know that you collaborate and knowledge share. You spoke to this. You knowledge share continually with other race directors across our country and beyond. And you mentioned learning a lot from folks like the Manitoba Marathon and the Queen City Marathon, both of which took place in September. I'm wondering if you would have done anything differently now that you've completed this event, and then generally what advice you now have to pass on to the other race directors hosting in-person events this fall.
Well, I wish I had copied Manitoba Marathon's pulse start plan exactly, because theirs went off without a hitch and we had a couple little hiccups. Yeah, Rachel Monday from Manitoba Marathon. I feel like Manitoba Marathon flies under the radar a little bit. It's such an excellent event, but because they're in Manitoba and maybe they only get people from the prairies, they don't quite get the attention that they should. It's so well executed. It's such a great finish. And they were the first. They had a big event early in September. Rachel and her awesome team there, they worked out a lot of the bugs and information shared. I was getting pictures and video in real time from Charlotte Brooks at Canada Running Series that morning when she was there helping at the start. So they get free cones. That's the inside scoop. So they had a cone for every person. We pay for every cone. So we tried to do it with what do you call it? Glow posts and tape, and tried to separate them. But now I wish I'd paid the extra few bucks for the cones. So Rachel and Charlotte were at our start line managing our pulse start. And there's lots of video online of the event to see how it went. So basically it was chip time, not gun time, except for anybody who started off the gun time right off the start. We didn't do prizing or high performance, but we did recognize the top winners, of course. And so, I think if I could go back and change anything, I would rejig that. And we will for the next time, because I think that we'll probably be doing this for a little while yet. And we still have 2 events before the end of the season. So that was one thing that I took away from Rachel and wish I had really honed in and copied her a little bit further. But it certainly was amazing to have race directors here helping us. So we had Ian Fraser from Run Ottawa was managing one of my really tricky corners where I split runners. It was great to have him out on course. And then Charlotte and Rachel were our dynamic bib assignment duo for most of package pickup. And then on course, they worked so hard. So huge shout out to have those guys come was really meaningful. Like we've been on Zoom together for the last 18 months, having happy and not so happy hours, discussing everything from, what we're talking about today, Kate, like the moral, ethical issues around having events and communications and logistics. So to have them there, even though we only got a little bit of time and shared moments, was really special.
Have you had a lot of outreach from other race directors since your event?
Yeah. Yeah. Even on race morning, like I didn't get a chance to answer texts, but I was getting texts from people like literally all over the world saying, good luck, we're watching, we're proud of you, and just commenting on pictures on social media. It's like the community of race directors is really tight and really supportive of one another. And I'm super grateful for their friendships and their mentorship.
So you talked about how a number of people chose to sort of switch from the in-person to the virtual sort of at the last minute. And I'm sure there was, as you mentioned, a lot of flip-flopping back and forth, depending on how folks were feeling comfortable in the days leading up. But this was, from the outset, it was intended to be a hybrid event this year. I'm wondering how it was balancing that in-person and the virtual experiences, because most of us have had for so long now is the virtual experience. And I can imagine logistically, you already spoke to some of the challenges of holding both, but from sort of an overall experience, how do you think that Calgary Marathon did a good job of balancing those things?
Putting on a virtual event and a in-person event concurrently is 2 events. That's what we've learned. It is essentially a completely different, separate event that requires its own communications, its own marketing, its own fulfillment, and to run them concurrently is challenging for sure. I don't think they're going anywhere. Like I said, we had 5,200 runners total, and 1,200-ish of those, or just shy of that, were virtual runners. So we're talking about a significant amount of engagement and outreach, as well as, obviously revenue for the organization. And we're hoping that those people are, in-person runners at some point and do the virtual when they can't be. So I think virtual is here to stay, but we'll be refining the process for probably years to come. Essentially, it's really hard to explain, but basically, you require 2 teams. Like we definitely had our own army of volunteers who were upstairs packaging virtual packages to get them in the mail, because part of the magic of a virtual race is getting your package. Like that's our main touch point with someone that feels tactile and you can hold it in your hand. Everything else is digital. So we really aspire for people to get their packages in advance of their race and have done a pretty incredible job of that all year long. And then where we hit a pinch point this year was just with Calgary Marathon and having beat Beethoven that week before, we weren't able to get every single package in the mail before the 19th. So we did run our virtual package pickup with our in-person, which also caused some challenges because it was confusing for volunteers. So I know there's at least 3 or 4, virtual participants who went home without their medal. And then that means like we either have to put that in the mail or they have to make a second trip. So the nuances when you're essentially running the 2 events concurrently created a little bit of friction for the organization, but we learned a lot. And what I would say that we are excellent at as Run Calgary is seeing our shortfalls and figuring out how to fix them. So I feel like next year it will be a lot tighter. A simple change, like we're going to print just virtual bibs that aren't the same as everybody else's. And we're going to print those a month out, because that was a pinch point. If we had, had different bibs and we weren't waiting on bibs coming, then we could have got more packages in the mail early. So little things that people don't quite understand. The other thing is virtual participants, listen closely. We can only send you your package if you put in your address correctly. The number of packages that come back and people are like, upset. And well, I didn't got it. And it's like, well, you didn't put in your unit number or your postal code is wrong. Like, we can't help that. We only print, just like the name that's on your bib is whatever name you put in first name. Yeah. So if you put your last name where your first name is supposed to be, like, we didn't go in and change that. That's because that's the field that you put your name in. So it's really important to enter into that data so that you can, get your package on time and it can be addressed properly and your bib has the right name on it. Those things all matter.
I think that's a very fair ask of your participants. It's a good reminder, though. So your event, of course, in partnership with the Scotiabank Charity Challenge, I believe Kirsten raised over $325,000 for Canadian charities this year. Is that number correct?
That is correct. It's a lot less than normal. We typically see fundraising closer to the $1 million mark. But what we know is that a lot of charities this year, were down employees and doubling up on jobs. So what we found is that fundraising was down because it was also a different time of year. The summer was, I think, a little trickier for outreach. Schools weren't in, so schools do a lot of fundraising. But the 60 charities that did participate in the Scotiabank Charity Challenge, I heard are over the moon. We've already had some email and feedback. And when at a time when a lot of things like galas and golf tournaments and other fundraising avenues haven't been available, I know that this was very meaningful. And the number at 325, we're pretty stoked, and fundraising is still open until mid-October.
Yeah, I was going to say, even though that number might be down significantly, it is still a tremendous amount of money that is going to those charity partners. And you had spoken earlier about how, although there was some risk and you were sort of doing everything you could to mitigate that with the health and safety protocols, you said it would have been probably far more disappointing to the runners who wanted to be out there if you hadn't put it on. This is a piece that I know Alan Brooks talks a lot about with his partnership with the Scotiabank Charity Challenge, but maybe isn't the first thing that would come to mind for folks when they think about the value of holding an in-person event like this, is that there is a tremendous impact that's made on the broader community because of events in our sport and in our running world. I'm sure that was a real driving factor for a number of your participants this year.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we have a significant number of our participants who fundraise for the same charities every year and come back, and they're integral to the event, and they make it a special day with a lot of great stories that come out of it. And really, like, the Scotiabank Calgary Marathon event is, one day, but the outreach and the engagement that happens around it goes on for months before and after. And in fact, kind of starts all over again right after we pack up the last box of bananas at the end of the day. And so, it is one of those things that makes our city a more vibrant place to live. Typically in May, we've got people training through the winter. It's something that, I think our team is really proud of, that keeps Calgarians active and outside during, a long Canadian winter. And then that fundraising piece is just so crucial. And now being in this job for almost a decade, I have gotten to know these charities and some of the people who actually benefit from those dollars. And to see it being pumped back into the community and have those people come out and now experience our event is very special and meaningful.
The Calgary Marathon is Canada's oldest marathon, and I know that's something, it's a title that you wear very proudly. What did it mean for you to celebrate 57 years of this event with your team under these circumstances this year?
Yeah, I'm still processing, to be honest. I keep joking, like, we just did that by the skin of our chinny chin chins because it was so touch and go. And so I'm definitely still processing and trying to figure out just exactly how to articulate how special this year was. But I think, like, what I'll say is that this is so much more than a paycheck to me and my team. Like, we're so invested in the success of the event and what it does for the community. And so to see it come together and hear the stories, we always get a lot of people who reach out through social media or send us emails just saying thank you for the event. But the volume this year has been next level because I think people recognize just how many barriers we had to overcome to be able to put on this year's Scotiabank Calgary Marathon, the 57th year. And it will go down in history as a very, very special and strange year. But I think hopefully the turning point where we start to see the return of more races, because this year was for sure speckled with a number of events across the country, but I think there were more cancellations than there were success stories. And obviously we are, facing 2 lost years of revenue, and the face of the industry, I think, is forever changed. There will always be the before and after, and we're all figuring out what that path forward looks like. But the sooner that we can get back to having people at start lines and training and having goals and bringing together community and those, like what we talked about, the important charity fundraising dollars, I think the better off our communities will be, especially if we can continue to do them in safe ways and learn from one another.
Well, after, again, almost 20 months, I'm sure it feels very exciting to be able to say that we're at least at the beginning of the after of those 2 options. So again, congratulations to you and your entire team with Run Calgary for putting on a successful hybrid Calgary Marathon race weekend with the largest number of participants of any race event in Canada since the beginning of this pandemic. And good luck with all of your events in the future. Maybe you can tell us, I know you said you have 2 more events this fall. What else do you have on the roster?
Yeah, I should say 2 in person. We actually have 4 total. So Run Calgary, we have our calendar of events. You can see it at runcalgary.com. But if you live in or around Calgary, come see us in person. We have the only zoo run. It's called the Wild Run. And this year we are raising money for Vancouver Island marmots. They're so cute. And they just found a whole new little pod of them. So we have lots to talk about in the marmot world. And that event is on Sunday, Thanksgiving Sunday, and it's a 16-mile or a relay, and you can do it with up to 4 people. And it's a fun, great little event. And then our last in-person of the year is Dash of Doom. And this is a legendary, awesome Calgary race that has become a real staple on the calendar for dog lovers. It's our only dog-friendly event where we actually encourage you to bring out your dogs. And we're kind of at that precipice where we sometimes have almost as many dogs as people. It's a Halloween race, and the winning costume of the dog goes on the medal and the shirts next year. So we have people that have already emailed us in the summer saying that they're working on their dog costumes. So Dash of Doom. And then we also have a virtual race called 12Ks of Christmas and a virtual challenge called Winter Moves, that is all about getting outside and playing in the Rockies or in the mountains as much as you can over the winter.
I was going to say, I think I'm hearing a dog collar in the background, maybe. Is that,
Yeah.
as you were just starting to talk about that. That's funny.
Run Calgary is dog friendly, and I have my dog here in my office today.
That's excellent. Kirsten, thank you so much for joining us, and we wish you the best of luck. I can't wait to get out to Calgary one of these years, hopefully, and see you in person.
Yeah, thank you so much. We would love to have you come sometime.
Can't wait. You can learn more about Run Calgary and all their events by visiting runyyc.ca. You can learn more about us at runningmagazine.ca or by following us on social media at Shakeout Podcast. Subscribe to our show on Apple Podcasts, and if you're enjoying our content, please consider leaving us a review. We'll be back next week with more from the world of running, but until then, thanks for tuning in and stay safe and healthy.